right. Hello there, everyone. My name is Emily May. I am the co-founder and president here at Right to Be. For those of you that don't know, we work to end hate and harassment in all of its forms. We are watching a rise in hate around the country. And so we wanted to bring in some experts on this issue to really drill down into what this is looking like for different communities and in different places across the United States. I am so proud to be joined today by Elana Kahn, who is the executive director of the Illinois Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes. Welcome, Elana.
Good morning. Nice
So,
to be with
Elana,
you.
you tackle hate and discrimination for a living. That's not easy work to be looking into the face of day in and day out.
Mm.
What drew you into this field?
Well, I spent many years actually representing the Jewish community, and um, I was the sort of point person on anti-Semitism, which led me to a lot of prevention work and a lot of coalition building, understanding that our fates are intertwined. The problem is is a shared problem, and the solutions are shared solutions. And so I did a lot of relationship building and collaborative programming. And this was an unexpected to come to the state of Illinois. It was an unexpected, um, but really natural evolution to now be thinking, how can we as a state support communities so that they can better not only respond to acts of hate and protect those who are affected by them, but also develop really robust responses. And I would just say you're right, it isn't easy, as you know. Um,
No.
Especially in this time of outrage and grievance and really um, impenetrable discourse, I would say, of blaming each other for our own troubles, demonizing people who are unlike us, abandoning our ability to deal constructively and respectfully with difference. And I feel a really great sense of purpose to try to stick to, assert, remind, train, learn different ways of navigating difficulty. I feel like that's really holy work right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And having done this work for 20 years myself, I've seen
Mm.
so many shifts in the field. I'm curious to hear from you on how have you seen the field shift since you entered it, right? And how do you define, this moment that we're in? Like what's going on?
I didn't mean to enter the world of hate. I really didn't. In my former position, it was interesting. We started a campaign called Hours Against Hate, like, clock hours, which the idea was spend spend an hour with people who are different than you. We actually made it lunch hour and we gave lunch bags to people. Um, and when I went around town, this was in Milwaukee, and I tried to get community leaders on board, they were really put off by the word hate.
Mm,
And they were like, can't we just say like love your neighbor? Why do we have to say hate? And that's been one huge change. We used to say we might have a hard time saying what is anti-Semitism, what exactly is that, is it racist? Is it not racist? But we know hate when we see it, which was why we chose that word. And now we found that the word um, is pretty understood and accepted, targeting people because of who they are, because of essential characteristics. So that's one thing, is that the language has changed. And I suppose all the things under the language. I think also the for most of my career, I thought about the victims. I thought about the people who were being targeted. And I still think about that. But there's a field now, and the field has really embraced a public health frame. And so we're thinking not just about helping the people who have been harmed, but about kind of going upstream and figuring out, why are people doing this? And how do we address the hurts or whatever it is that leads somebody to become a person who will target others because of their identity. So I think that's another thing. And I would say also, it's so, maybe this isn't different, this is the same, but it is so clear that our safety is inextricably tied to our well-being. So we
Mhm.
can't just like put out messages, don't hate me because I'm, this, but it has to be, how do we address the material and emotional and psychological needs of people so that they have a sense of belonging and well-being?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think a lot about that in my own journey. When we started, I was hyper focused on people experiencing hate and harassment because I was experiencing hate and harassment. That's how I got into this field, right?
Mhm.
Particularly street harassment, online harassment, workplace harassment, and thinking about that over time, you start to think about, well, what is the constellation of people actually involved in this, right? There's the people who are experiencing harassment, and then there's the people who are witnessing harassment or the bystanders, right, who want to do something. And then there's the people creating the hate or harassment. And I think that we have a little bit of a false divide in terms of thinking that they're all separate people or
Right.
and the reality is that I think all of us have experienced some created some form of harm, and I think all of us have witnessed some form of harm, although I do
Hmm.
think there's differences in the levels at which we have experienced, witnessed, or created harm, and a lot of those fall around identity lines. We know that people of color are experiencing more harm, immigrants are experiencing more harm, trans folks are experiencing more harm, women are experiencing more harm, and hate has become the umbrella to talk about all that at the same time. Um, in this moment, we're obviously seeing a big backlash. I think as a movement, we've made tremendous progress in the past 10 years, in particular with Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Stop AAPI Hate. We've made tremendous progress on the issue of hate and harassment. And now we're in a backlash. We're seeing, unprecedented attacks on the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, on immigrants, on trans folks. And a lot of that is coming out of the federal government. How do you see the actions that are coming out of the federal government impacting cities, communities, and people across Illinois?
There was a lot in what you said. I really appreciate it. People are afraid. The commission, we spent the first, I've been here almost 2 years, and we spent the first period building the foundations. We started a helpline and turned that into a whole program called Help Stop Hate. We've started a study to get data about hate in the state and also resources. And now we're really focusing on building a network. So we've been visiting with a lot of folks in communities to try to understand what they're experiencing and to see how we can support them. Because what works in Chicago may not work in Peoria or other locales. But what we're hearing when we meet with, well, just about everybody, is that people are feeling really threatened and afraid. Um, and if they can, they're hiding who they are.
Mhm.
I have heard about immigrants or people who may be mistaken as undocumented who are being targeted when they ride their bikes. And they've told their children, don't talk about immigration at all with anyone at school. You go to school and you come right home. Or by the way, you don't go to school. People are staying home. Um, and one of the interesting things in Illinois that we're thinking a lot about is, we have very strong state laws protecting people. And often the federal government is asking institutions and municipalities to violate state law, and um, it puts municipalities in sticky spots. Are they going to lose? Do they not honor the broad protections of this state in order to not lose federal funding? Some have been threatened with arrest, so it's affecting all sorts of people. I would say also, like, I learned this from a former colleague, but every toothache hurts. And so I think there is this thing of competitive victimhood,
Mhm.
um, and it just never works.
Mhm.
It never works to say my hurt. We can probably measure harm and say my harm is worse than yours, but it does it matter to a person emotionally who goes home and lives with themselves, we have to address, we can't push anybody to the outside and say your hurt doesn't matter. It just, it doesn't work. Even if it were right, it doesn't work because people take their hurts and they impose them on other people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So let's drill down a little bit. Like, how do you see hate showing up differently in rural versus urban areas? And you mentioned different things work in different places. Like, what's working when it comes to addressing these issues, building these bridges, and helping people to see each other's hurt?
That's really good. Um, there are, we're working with a mayor of a community that experienced a mass shooting, and she is unafraid to engage with the people who are, you know, disrupting meetings and angry with her. So she tells the story about somebody who like came to city council meeting after city council meeting, you know, just with the intention of disrupting. And she finally was like, "Do you want to go out for coffee?"
Mm,
And what I appreciate about that is that it was a rejection of the binary of the us versus them. She was like, "I just want to listen to what you have to say." And she listened actually. Um, and I think that works when we can become people who reject the binary rules of conflict. I think, and you know, hate is local. So it, while we can provide, and the state, we can provide resources that no one else has the ability to provide, maybe, you know, we could, like, I like our helpline, Help Stop Hate, like the state study. Um, we know that we need to support communities in the work that they're doing. So those that are being, I'm a little bit all over the place, but I would say that have strong leaders that themselves step into the fray, reject the binary, don't fall for the invitations, you know, for the invitations to engage in this sort of what I think is silly fighting. But it's just not productive fighting. But also the communities that are really thinking about how do we map our resources so that we can create more well-being for everybody. Because it's
mm,
the way to reduce targeted violence is to, you know, go back to make sure to the beginning, you know, make sure that people are have what they need, you know, are not engaging in unhealthy behaviors like too much time in the internet, et cetera. And one, you know, in your question was sort of what's different between urban and rural, and it's interesting because sometimes the language is different. I think rural communities are less comfortable with the word hate.
mm,
Um, I think it can be hard to be the only one in communities there that are have one dominant culture.
mm,
That's hard. But there's so much that's the same. You know, people are, we're living in a time of real isolation, of real aloneness. People are less connected to each other. Online life is just, there's a lot of good. Like this, we're talking to each other. Um, but there's really a lot of bad, and it
mm,
leads to a lot of disconnection that might look like connection, but people, you know, we know there's, this is, I'm not an academic, this is well documented. And so we're seeing people becoming radicalized to violent extremism through games, through online living. And I would say the last thing, which I alluded to before, that people feel left behind, which we can't ignore. You know, no matter who they are, we can't ignore it. We can't just rail against it. And we actually, it's not just pretty talk, but we must attend to all of us.
yeah, no, I agree with that. And interesting to hear that comment about, rural areas perhaps not embracing the word hate
Yeah.
as openly. And I think it makes sense in some ways, right? Because nobody self-identifies as a hater. Nobody
Right.
self-identifies as a harasser, right? Like nobody identifies as these things. And for us working in this space, we're like, well, it's very hard to say racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, ableism every single time we want to, talk about what communities are experiencing. And those words are heavy and they're opaque. I mean, even diversity, equity, and inclusion, which if you test it, now that phrase and in sort of message testing, that phrase diversity, equity, inclusion is loaded up in a way that Americans on the whole, particularly the movable middle, has a feeling. Okay, fine, we don't
Mhm.
need to use those words, right? But if you test the word, people of the phrase to people of different backgrounds, everybody's like, yes, I believe in that.
Right.
If
Right.
instead of equity, you say creating equal opportunity for all, people are like,
Yep.
yes, I
Our
believe.
language gets politicized.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If
Yeah.
you say,
And it
instead of
gets,
saying inclusion, you say the word included, right? This is a recent study on
Mhm.
messaging. Included. People are like, yes, I want to feel included and I want everybody else to feel included too. Um, and
And
so, we look at this and I'm a little bit, I feel like as part of the anti-hate movement, as leaders in the anti-hate movement, we made a lot of progress, like pushing as hard as we could. And there's this thematic practice of, when you push against, people are going to push against you, right? And so
Mhm.
that is what we're seeing right now is that backlash, that push against, right? But if instead you have somebody who has really strongly held opinions, I'm not a racist, right? I don't hate people, I don't harass people, and you kind of hold them for a second, they'll relax a
Mhm.
little bit, they'll open up a little bit. And so I feel like now it's not just about, changing the words that we're using, which have become overly politicized. It's actually about that work that you spoke about with the mayor of how do we hold each other, right? Knowing that we're all pretty much aligned, that we want the same things. It's just how do we get there together?
Mhm. And I would say that most people, there are some avowed racists, like some true believers. But
We're not going to
most,
move those people
no,
though. They're
but
just off doing their thing.
but most people, and maybe even them too, are driven by some affirmative values, even though if those values are a feeling of being targeted and protecting something. I
Uh-huh.
mean, most people are not driven by the negative, they're driven by some of their own needs. And so, like, what are those needs? And I
Yeah,
think it would be very healthy for all of us to be a little more curious.
I think so too. And I think one of the big reveals of this recent election is the ways in which a lot of the anti-hate work has very much ignored low-income communities, and very much ignored the discrimination that people face, not having access to the same level of resources or education as others, regardless of the rest of the identities that they're holding.
Right.
And this is a trend. This is actually, believe it or not, this is what I focused on in my undergraduate education, and what I did my undergraduate uh, final project on. It's a trend that we see across America is because Americans want to believe if you are poor, that is your fault, right? We have
Mhm.
this ragged dick narrative. People need to pull themselves up from their bootstraps. It's a total meritocracy, and people just, if they don't have it, it's because they don't deserve it. That I think we really need to unpack and have a deeper conversation about, particularly in the anti-hate movement.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your undergrad? What was the title of it?
It was why is there no poor-led anti-poverty movement in the United
Mm.
States? And it was
Wow.
comparing what was happening in Europe, where there's really strong movements against poverty and classism historically, to what we've got in the United States, which we've never really had a momentous moment on that front. Not that there's not a lot of great organizing, right? There's the poor people's movement, there's union organizing. I don't want to discount the efforts there, but even in the anti-hate space, we tend to focus on racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism, and not that conversation on class. And even in educational environments, I could take
Mhm.
classes on racism, sexism, homophobia, but I couldn't take a class on classism unless I wanted to take a class on Marx, which is only one approach to addressing classism
Mhm.
and doesn't address the discrimination that a lot of folks are facing on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm. And that makes me think about, one of the effects of being targeted. Um, and I would include American slavery
Hmm.
in as an expression of being targeted, is that it really harms your sense of power, of value,
Hmm.
of agency. And there's a lot of healing that has to happen. like
Yeah.
internal healing that has to happen individually and collectively for people to fight for themselves, you know?
Yeah. I agree. I agree. It's part of that harm that impacts your health, your physical health,
Hmm.
your mental health, your emotional health, your
Yeah,
sense of ability to have agency in the
yeah,
world.
yeah, absolutely.
One of the really interesting things, and this may surprise some people, but despite all the conversations about public safety and despite all of the targeted violence that's happening, we are seeing as a country violent crime and homicides at an absolute all-time low. We are also seeing a rise in hate crimes. What do you attribute that discrepancy to? Why are homicides and violent crimes down, and why are hate crimes up?
Um, I think it's important that there is more hate crime reporting. We have better, there's more awareness that it's important about what hate crimes are. We're still far from people understanding that not everything is a hate crime. Um, there are more mechanisms to report hate crimes. So we have better reporting of hate crimes. We're still far away from what I would like to see, which is that people feel, people understand what hate is. You know, if something is discrimination, the police are not necessarily the right avenue. And we have robust free speech in this country. So you can stand on the street and yell hateful things at people, and that may still not be a hate crime. And then if you go to law enforcement and they're like, sorry, that's legal, that may be really discouraging. Nevertheless, so that's one of the things we're thinking about a lot, is how do we train law enforcement to recognize and report things as hate crimes,
Mhm.
hate crimes as hate crimes? How do we train state's attorneys or district attorneys to prosecute? How do we train prosecutors to prosecute hate crimes as hate crimes? How do we train judges to identify and handle hate crimes appropriately? And how do we train people in communities to support each other so that they direct them to report it? So that's number one, that there is better reporting. We have a way to go, but there's better reporting. Um, but the motivation is completely different, you know, between a regular crime and a bias motivated crime. You know, a hate crime is motivated by bias against somebody's identity. And I know identity itself has become a word that people are can be triggered by. Triggered is a word that people are triggered by. But um, but I think the rise in hate crimes tells us a lot about our climate, tells us about social instability, about people feeling unsure, afraid, and therefore inclined to put their boot on somebody else's neck, to keep somebody else down. It's, you know, it's a short study in history that tells us about scapegoating. You know, when people feel afraid for their own well-being, they're going to look for somebody else to blame. Um, so I think, you know, I'm not a criminologist, but that is my understanding, that I think, I can't tell you why violent crime is down. Um, we're seeing that in Chicago too.
Mm,
Violent crime is down, but property and burglary and robberies, I think, are not so down.
mm,
Um, and that tells us about people's well-being,
mhm.
certainly. But hate crimes are different. They're really different.
Yeah. Yeah. Hate crimes, I think, are a little bit more about the culture that we
Mhm.
live in, and they're about what you're taught, and they're about what you're scared of. Um,
Totally.
Whereas, burglaries are about, what you
But you don't
don't
have, right?
have. So there's a different motivation there.
And
Um,
and I would say we do, and this is, we do, we are living in a time in which we're having leaders openly saying hateful things, encouraging people to, you know, unmask what had been masked. And, you know, peace is sometimes, it's not necessarily about like love and flowers and sweetness, even though love would be better. But peace is about like living peaceably. I have re-embraced the word tolerance. I think like in the 90s, I was like, tolerance isn't enough. You know what? Tolerance would be great. You can live next to your neighbors and let them be.
mhm.
That would be enough.
Yep. The right to be exactly who they are, wherever they are.
Exactly.
Um, I think that with all of our communities being attacked at the same time, I think the highest possible outcome that we can explore is our collective liberation. Now, that's a big
Mhm.
word, right? What does it mean for us all to be free? But the lowest possible outcome is for increased divisions happening amongst our communities. And we're seeing that happening too. What is it going to take to bring us together across identities, approaches, and issue areas to combat hate in all of its forms?
That's a very big question, Emily.
I know,
Um,
I know. I'm not asking you the easy stuff.
um, there is no denying that we are inextricably bound to each other. There's
Yeah.
no denying it, and we can pretend, but it is a basic truth. Um, but I would say in a practical way, hate is local. Even if what you're experiencing is on social media or, you know, games, you get off the games and you're in a place surrounded by people or not surrounded by people, and people go to work and people go to school, and the solutions are local too. So I would say join a local organization. I would say we need to build more coalitions, um, and especially with the people that we least understand. um, God, I would really love a return to curiosity and humility.
Mhm.
Wouldn't that be nice? But we
Mhm.
can't do it alone. We need to coordinate. We need to collaborate, um, which is really hard when we feel deeply threatened. And I get that. Like, I know what it's like to feel terrified of what's going to come out of somebody's mouth, because it feels like uh, uh, an essential threat. And I was really moved. And then our commission read and hosted the author of a book called High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. And it was very much, I think very much about the way she frames conflict and the role that we each have in conflict. Like, we can either be the people who, and I'm not going to use her exact language, the thing about high conflict, like destructive conflict, is that you want to tear each other down. That's not conflict that's going to lead you somewhere new or that's going to solve problems. And we each pretty continually have a choice about who we're going to be. So one of the features, not to get too far into it, but one of the features of destructive conflict is this very binary thinking. And ironically, as we've understood that gender isn't binary, it isn't. You might want it to be, some people might want it to be, but it's not. We have ideologically become very binary thinking. And the last thing I'll say is it's a radical act to continue to believe in our own values and to dream and to envision a better future. And most of us know what's right. We know the kind of world we want to live in. And I think it's a radical act to stick to it and spend some time thinking about the world we want.
Yeah.
And it is a person by person act. As you know, training people is not just like delivering information to people, but it is about like how do we create the conditions so that people can feel and think they can make internal change. That's what, like, the principles of education. It's not just about knowledge, there's knowledge everywhere, but how do we change our own hearts and minds?
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. I have one last question before we close out today. You mentioned that a lot of people are scared right now.
Mhm.
They're scared of being deported. They're scared of having their gay marriage delegitimized or of accessing gender affirming healthcare or simply what their neighbors might say to them on the way to the grocery store. For all of us who are scared in this moment, what advice do you have for us?
Well, I'm gonna like do the hard and the soft is not the right word, but I think it was Coretta Scott King that said every generation has to fight for freedom.
Mm,
Um, and it made me think, I saw someone else put it a different way. She put it in terms of like fantasy or science fiction. I always get the two
yeah,
genres confused, but basically the world doesn't stay saved. Like,
Yeah.
we have to keep saving the world.
Mhm.
So um, it means fighting for what's right. And maybe fighting it's not exactly the word I mean, but asserting and demanding what's right. Um, and sometimes a fight requires difficult choices. And the rules of war can't apply to the life that we want. I grew up in a time of in, that makes it was that in my life makes the time we're in feel unusual. But I think for most of the world, this is not unusual.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think there are things we can do. Like, where do we have power? And let's do something about it. We are not passive. We are not weak. We are not victims. Even if we have hurts, we have to care about people. Number one, like the first thing and the last thing, we have to care about people. Even if we think our idea is the right one, maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, but we have to care about human beings. Because if we're hurting people on the way, it's worth a pause. Bystander training. I'm a big fan of the training that you do at Right to Be, is a really great start. I've heard about how people have taken bystander training, and I heard from this Japanese woman actually at a listening session we had who told about this incident, and she said, I felt powerless. And then I went through this training, and I was sitting on the train, and I saw this woman being bullied, and I knew just what to do. And I went over and sat next to her, and she talked about the power of being trained well, which is like the basic idea is back to what I
Mhm.
said, which is that we each have power. We are not victims. So we
Exactly.
have to dream of better, and we have to just keep saving the world.
We got to dream of better. We got to keep saving the world. And we got to keep taking care of each other. That's the move, right?
Yep, that's it.
Community is the immunity. Thank you so much, Elana. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for your leadership in Illinois and broadly in this anti-hate movement. I
It's
think,
mutual.
we get here because we're in it together, and we're proud to be in this work with you guys.
As are we. Thank you so much.